Good evening. Over in Wisconsin, a former state Supreme Court justice who has been investigating allegations of election fraud over the last several months, he recently came out and made a statement and said that some form of cover-up is obviously taking place. Meanwhile, 2 days ago, the Biden administration's vaccine mandate for healthcare workers was dealt another blow. That's because a federal judge expanded the injunction against it. And so whereas before the mandate was blocked in only 10 states, but now the vaccine mandate is blocked in all 50 states. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion over in Wisconsin. Now, you might remember that back in August of this year, Mr. Robin Vos, who is the Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly, he's a Republican, and he announced that his office had expanded their probe into the 2020 election, and they even assigned a special counsel to the case. Now, to give you a bit of background, in case you're not aware of what's been happening in Wisconsin, earlier this year, back in early 2021, Robin Vos authorized an investigation into the 2020 election, which was then carried out by Mr. Michael Gableman, who is a former state Supreme Court justice over in Wisconsin. And then after several months of him actually carrying out the investigation, back in August of this year, Mr. Vos designated this former Supreme Court justice as a special counsel, which granted him even more authority to investigate the election fraud allegations. Here's what Mr. Vos said in a statement back when he announced his decision, which was again all the way back in August of this year. To restore full integrity and trust in elections, we have decided to change direction, giving more authority and independence to Justice Gableman. I am declaring him special counsel, and I'm giving him the authority to hire more full-time investigators who will work at his direction. Now, while Mr. Vos did not set up an actual timetable for the completion of this investigation, he did say that he hoped that it would be finished by the fall. However, of course, we are now in the month of December, and frankly, there have been very few updates. However, just yesterday, Mr. Gableman made an announcement. While giving an update to the Wisconsin Assembly's Committee on Elections, Mr. Gableman said that it was clear to him that some form of a cover-up was taking place. Here's specifically what Mr. Gableman said to the Wisconsin Assembly. Green Bay Mayor Eric Genrich and Madison Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway have chosen to ignore the subpoenas issued by the Wisconsin Assembly because they have no intention of answering uncomfortable questions about what they did with the millions of dollars in Zuckerberg money that they took. Now, notice in that statement that Mr. Gableman mentioned millions of dollars of Zuckerberg money, and this requires a bit of context. There was a report that was released by the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society. I'll actually put it up on screen for you. And this report detailed how Mark Zuckerberg donated approximately $500 million of his own money in order to help out the 2020 election. Specifically, the bulk of that money went to an organization called the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which is, of course, a very benign-sounding name. But what exactly is this organization? Well, to start with, it is a nonprofit that was started by former managers as well as former staff members of another organization called the New Organizing Institute. And that was a progressive nonprofit. And then furthermore, according to their official website, here's what the Center for Tech and Civic Life actually aims to do. Quote, "We harness the promise of technology to modernize the American voting experience. What you get: high-performing election offices, increased public confidence and trust, a more resilient and adaptive election system, better informed voters." Now, that is, of course, a very high and noble-sounding aim. But how did they exactly work to achieve that goal in the year 2020? Well, again, according to this report, what they did was that prior to the election, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, they began sending agents into different states in order to recruit certain Democrat strongholds. They then had those areas prepare grant applications, and then they had them send in those application requests for money in order to fund those grants. For example, according to this report, the center gave $100,000 to Mr. Corey Mason, who is the mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, in order to recruit 4 other cities to develop a plan and then to request a larger grant to fund that plan. Those 5 cities, they then submitted a plan back in June of 2020, and they in total received $6.3 million in order to implement that plan. Now, on the surface, you might look at that and say, okay, well, that sounds like a good thing. The center is just helping out election officials, and they are subsidizing their work. It is a good thing, and it helps out elections. However, according to this report, What this really was essentially the privatization of America's elections. Specifically, this research shows that the Center for Tech and Civic Life, they overwhelmingly used the money from Mark Zuckerberg to help develop elections in progressive as well as Democrat strongholds. Here's specifically what the report said on this front. Quote, Mark Zuckerberg's money allowed these Democrat strongholds to spend roughly $47 per voter compared to $4 to $7 per voter in traditionally Republican areas of the state. Meaning essentially that the Center for Tech and Civic Life overwhelmingly helped Democrat strongholds to get out the vote, while Republican strongholds, not so much. Now, the big question is this actually legal? Well, according to this report, this kind of privatization of elections, and this is exactly what it says, quote, undermines the Help America Vote Act, which requires state election plans to be submitted to federal officials and approved, and requires respect for equal protection by making all resources available equally to all voters. And so, Mr. Gableman, the former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice, he is now actually investigating this matter. But according to statements that he made in front of the Wisconsin Assembly just yesterday, it appears that the local officials in Wisconsin, they are stonewalling him. Specifically, Mr. Gableman, he is requesting that the mayors of Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Racine, as well as Kenosha hand over all communication between themselves and the Center for Tech and Civic Life. However, these mayors, they are saying that the subpoenas that they were issued, are asking for too much and that it would take them too long to comply with the requests. And therefore, they have not handed anything over to this very day. However, yesterday, before the Wisconsin Assembly, here's what Mr. Gableman said in regard to these 5 mayors, who, by the way, are all Democrats. Reasonable minds may wonder whether the millions of dollars each of these mayors receive from the Zuckerbergs may have induced them to something other than treating all candidates fairly and impartially, and whether those mayors used the Zuckerberg money to get out the vote for Joe Biden. Furthermore, Mr. Gableman pointed to both a lawsuit from the Wisconsin Elections Commission that's actually trying to kill his investigation, as well as the fact that the mayor of Green Bay is beginning to lawyer up, and he said that these 2 facts tell him that the people who were involved with Mark Zuckerberg's funding, they don't want to answer any questions. Here's specifically what he said, again, in front of the Wisconsin Assembly. They are trying to run and hide from accountability to the citizens they are supposed to serve. Why go through all of this legal evasion, maneuvering, and expense unless they do not want the public to know what they have done? Furthermore, during his testimony, Mr. Gableman revealed for the first time that he has filed writ of attachment over in Waukesha County Court against 2 of Wisconsin's mayors. And for your reference, in case you're not aware, a writ of attachment would actually allow the court to seize documents as well as other pieces of evidence that Mr. Gableman is asking for in his investigation, regardless of whether these different mayors don't want to hand them over or not. And then lastly, to the people in Wisconsin who are accusing Mr. Gableman of playing politics or trying to overturn the 2020 election, here's what he said. My job as special counsel is to gather all relevant information. And while I will draw my own conclusions, my goal is to put everything I know and everything I learned before you, so you can make up your own mind. But I think it's critical to know that an obstruction of this office is an obstruction of each citizen's right to know whether all ballots were appropriately counted, that our elections were managed with fairness, inclusivity, and accountability. This is not an election contest. We are not challenging the results of the 2020 election. Rather, we are holding government officials accountable to the public for their actions surrounding the elections. And so we will continue to keep an eye on this investigation, and as more facts are revealed, no matter how slow that might be, I will let you know right away. Otherwise, if you'd like to read about all the developments that we discussed over in Wisconsin, I will throw all the links to all the research I mentioned into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you vote with your finger and smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, before we move on over and discuss how a federal judge has dealt another blow to the Biden administration's vaccine mandate for healthcare workers, I would like to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, and I will do so from the sound booth. That's right, Roman. The sponsor of today's episode is an awesome company called Patriot Supply. So I don't know about you, but I have friends who all they have is this saved up in case of an emergency. And don't get me wrong, I love toilet paper as much as the next guy, and it's better to have it than to not. But frankly, if that's all you have saved up in case of an emergency, then you are really not prepared, because listen, with the supply chains stretched to the extreme as they are, with inflation that raging, and with the government even admitting that it might default on its loan obligations, I mean, a disaster looks like it might be coming. In my opinion, it's a question of when, not if. And so I would highly recommend that you prepare. In my own house, I have cupboards, I have an entire closet that's filled with food, ready to go in case anything goes down. And so if you don't have food prepared, I would highly recommend that you go on over to preparewithfactsmatter.com. That's the website that they're prepared for us, and buy food from Patriot Supply. They have sold food to millions of Americans, and right now you can save $100 off of their 3-month emergency food kit, which gives you a plentiful supply of breakfast, lunches, dinners, drinks, and snacks for a 3-month period per person. Again, this is something that you absolutely need. And when you head on over to their website, you'll see they don't only sell food, they sell pretty much everything you need to survive a disaster. Air and water purifiers, survival gear, camping gear, pretty much everything you need. So as they say, don't be caught standing in a government food line when the disaster hits. Go on over to preparewithfactsmatter.com and save $100 off that 3-month food kit. They're gonna send it to your door quickly and discreetly. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over and talk about the vaccine mandates. And to start with, earlier this week, we already discussed how a federal judge issued a restraining order and blocked the Biden administration from enforcing the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers across 10 different states. As a quick reminder, the judge in that case, whose name, by the way, was Matthew Schlepp, he was appointed by President Trump, and what he wrote in his order was that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, otherwise known as the CMS, they lacked the authority to impose such a broad mandate on the country. Here's in fact what he wrote as a part of his ruling. Plaintiffs are likely to succeed in their argument that Congress has not provided CMS the authority to enact the regulation at issue here. Congress did not clearly authorize CMS to enact this politically and economically vast, federalism-altering, and boundary-pushing mandate which Supreme Court precedent requires. And so, that judge, he issued a preliminary injunction which blocked the Biden administration from implementing their vaccine mandate while the case continued to play itself out in court. However, that injunction only applied to the 10 states which were party to that particular lawsuit. And for your reference, those 10 states, again, were Missouri, Nebraska, Alaska, Arkansas, Kansas, Iowa, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, as well as New Hampshire. However, there has now been an update. That's because just 2 days ago, a second federal judge, this one over in the state of Louisiana, he expanded that earlier injunction by making it applicable to the entire country. Meaning that as of 2 days ago, it is no longer just those 10 states which are prohibited from enforcing the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. Instead, as of right now, as of this moment, all 50 states in the entire nation are prohibited from enforcing it. Now, what specifically happened was that the Attorney General of Louisiana, Mr. Jeff Landry, he petitioned the court to expand the already existing injunction because the deadline for the vaccine mandate was coming up in Louisiana. Since it was not one of those 10 states included in the earlier injunction, they were at risk. And so, after reading through the arguments, Judge Terry Doughty, who was also nominated by President Trump, he agreed with the Louisiana Attorney General and he expanded the block of the vaccine mandate to include the entire country. And in terms of why he did so, well, here's part of what he wrote in his court order. Quote, "There is no question that mandating a vaccine to 10.3 million healthcare workers is something that should be done by Congress, not a government agency. It is not clear that even an act of Congress mandating a vaccine would be constitutional." The judge further added that during times of crisis, like a pandemic, it's even more important to guard our liberties and enforce the separation of powers. Here's specifically what he wrote on that second point. Quote, "The plaintiffs also have an interest in protecting its citizens from being required to submit to vaccinations. If human nature and history teach anything, it is that civil liberties face grave risks when governments proclaim indefinite states of emergency. During a pandemic such as this one, it is even more important to safeguard the separation of powers set forth in our Constitution to avoid erosion of our liberties." After this order was officially released, naturally enough, the Attorney General of Louisiana was quite pleased, and he released a statement saying this in part. "I applaud Judge Doughty for recognizing that Louisiana is likely to succeed on the merits and for delivering yet another victory for the medical freedom of Americans." Although, a little further down in his statement, he seemed to acknowledge that the court battle over vaccine mandates still has a long way to go. Here's specifically what he added. "While our fight is far from over, I am pleased that the court granted preliminary relief against the president's unconstitutional and immoral attack on not only our healthcare workers, but also the access to healthcare services for our poor and elderly. I will see this case through to the end, fighting every step of the way to prevent the federal government from imposing medical tyranny on our citizens and turning last year's healthcare heroes into this year's unemployed." And so, just to clarify, what has been issued here is a preliminary injunction, meaning that while the cases are playing themselves out in court, the federal government, they cannot enforce their vaccine mandates during this time period. However, given the size and the scope of the issues that are being debated in these cases, it's almost a guarantee, almost a 100% guarantee, that whoever loses at the appellate level will further appeal the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so then very likely, within the next few months, likely before the middle part of next year, it'll be the Supreme Court which will ultimately decide whether the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers is legal or not. We'll just have to wait and see. However, until then, you should know that if you are a healthcare worker anywhere in the United States, and if your employer tells you that you need to get the vaccine in order to stay employed, because the federal government is telling them that they need to do so, well, they are not telling the truth. Because at this very moment, as of 2 days ago, since this court order was issued, the federal government is officially barred from doing that. If you'd like to read more about this nationwide court order, I will throw the link to an article as well as the link to the PDF of this court order into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, since you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you go on over to Epoch TV and check out an awesome episode of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, where he discusses the Marxist takeover of America's churches. Here's a trailer for that awesome episode.
Today, I'm a very proud man. It's taken over 3 years, but we've finally launched our full-length documentary, Enemies Within the Church. Now, in our movie, we blow up a lot of sacred cows. A lot of people, a lot of Christians watching the movie will be shocked because many of the people we expose are respected. They write books, they lecture at colleges, they hold massive conferences. Thousands of young people go to church every Sunday. They'll hear a watered-down version of love and lots about critical race theory, ending white privilege, refugee resettlement, etc. And they think that is the path to salvation. That is the path to hell on earth. And there's a good reason for that, because it's promoted by Marxists and communists, and ultimately they are disciples of the devil.
If you want to check out that great episode as well as all the other phenomenal content over on Epoch TV, I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now, lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, consider hitting that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And then lastly, if you have an Instagram account, consider following me at Epoch Times Roman. I publish behind-the-scenes research as well as spicy memes. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.